and I hope people listen into this one, because for me, it was really around getting definitions behind WBS, behind AWP, and behind the lean and tech world, and why there's a need for them to come together. What was some of the friction points originally, but how some of the things that we're dealing with supply chain and materials, et cetera, and new constructability and new methods are driving a change where the two are actually AWP and lean and tact are coming through. Supply chain, work packaging work, whatever you want to call it. I'm really excited for the discussion. So quickly, introductions. My name's Jeff Sample. I'm the industry evangelist at Join. For those of you I don't know, I think I know most of you. This is a really interesting one. I was actually added to this as the moderator, given that I've done a lot of work over the last 2 years around work breakdown structures in the product that I work for at Join. And so I was very interested in this topic and where we go. I've also and work with Tanis Leviniak and a couple of others on advanced work packaging. So this is going to be a whole lot of fun. Too much about me right now. Let's jump in. How might we connect the origins of work breakdown structure, advanced work packaging, and the last planar system in ways that identify the common sort and filter characteristics that must be unified across project activity so that software can enable secure, seamless translation between specific stakeholders, terms, and project exchange requirements? That's a mouthful. A quick introduction of everybody here so everybody can talk about their perspectives. Panelists, I'll let y'all go last and you'll go in order of what you're bringing to the table. Todd, since you're in the world next to me here, I can remember where you are, you go first.
So Todd Sutton with Zachry Corporation. I have prior experience with doing work structuring and doing work breaking systems. For when we're doing vertical buildings, right now we're doing large infrastructure projects only, and in that world we mainly do work breakdown structures with our optimized work plans, and that are similar to it's kind of a cross between the AWP work packaging. So there's a crossover there. Have prior experience also basically currently I'm with CII, where we're also been using advanced work packaging through that. That's from my days on the industrial side, process plants and chemical plants.
Josh, you're on the thing, so I'm going to skip you. Alex, you're the next in the list.
Hey, yeah, so my name's Alex. This is actually the first one of these I've been to, so I'll probably do a lot of listening, but I'm the manager of strategic services with Trillium Advisory Group. I actually work with Dylan, got quite a bit of experience with AWP and the BIM world, so just yeah, I'm here to learn, listen, meet some people, and see what the industry's up to.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. That's who I was mentioning earlier. That's who taught me a lot about AWP, and I've worked with Trillium over time. So excited for this one. Benny, you're next in my whatever we call it view here.
Yeah, sure. Benny Baltrotsky. I'm now over at Stanley Black & Decker, overseeing go-to-market for construction technology, but spent the last 15 years focused on trade contractors. And originally with just working with WBS for trade contractors to see how they could sort of track and install work. And then that was at ESUB. And then I'd been working at M Suite prior, and we were doing a lot with AWP, or advanced work packaging, and understanding sort of looking at actually both worlds, right? How does we break out a model from an AWP perspective and how we're going to install it, but still letting them someone on the field still do their normal processes, or maybe their more legacy cost code and installation process. So this one sounds really interesting today. So happy to be here.
Cool. Laurie?
Hi, everybody. My name is Laurie Spitler. I'm with Autodesk. I'm the product manager for Assemble, which is a tool that helps customers work with model data and manage the data associated with the model. WBS is a huge use case within the umbrella of capability of Assemble, and really organizing and adapting data from design for actual execution and construction.
Awesome. Erez, then Dylan, you're on the deal. So Brian, you're next.
Great. My name is Breakout. Nice to meet you guys. Currently with Stanley Black & Decker Contact, working with Dado and M Suite, but was in the field working with field engineering and running work before that. So just trying to figure out what I can bring to the table.
Awesome. And Res phone, not sure. I feel like we have some security breach there, but Res phone, are you a person?
Yeah, it's Res Organ. I don't know why it's called Res
Oh,
phone, but
now
yeah.
I get it. You could start a company, Res, called Res Phone.
Nah, I don't mean to. So Res Organ, I'm with Gleeds and owners representative, globally headquartered in the UK, and I'm part of the US organization. My background is in all aspects of the built environment, from research to the field construction to project management to PMOs. My interest in this conversation is more focused around how we can scale AWP up and down to different domains, different verticals. I've seen it in action, utilizing an industrial life sciences type of project. And then I personally modeled it to scale it down to residential construction. And then by doing that, you need to break down some of the constraints of AWP. And that's where tax planning comes into play. And WBS plays an integral part in it in terms of being the backbone of it. So yeah, that's my interest in the topic and my experience with it. So happy to be here.
All right. Well, I always like being the one who probably knows the least in the room. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to get us right into our group here. I have an awesome panel. Of course, now my buttons don't work. There we go. See, I go too far. I'll go back one. Pete, I want to start with you and kind of let you give a quick introduction to who you are. And I can leave this up if you want right now and kind of give us level set where we are today.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I know some of you, not all of you. I have my camera off today. I just got out of knee surgery, so I'm kind of laid up a little bit right now. You probably don't want to see me, so forgive my camera being off. But anyway, I've got some background in these topics, relative to AWP that goes back to actually early days in Alberta with a workplace planning committee that COA, the Construction Owners Association of Alberta, started in the mid-2000s, and which eventually became AWP when COA and CII got together and merged the research and created a best practice out of it, and have been active in CII over the years as well. I know Tanis really well, by the way. In fact, it's Todd, I'm sure you're aware, you guys obviously have a relationship with Trillium now, Zachry and Trillium. But and then also on the lean side, what's that, Todd?
Different Zachrys.
It's a different Zachry. It's a Zachry corporation, that Zachry group.
Oh, that's the green Zachry, not the black Zachry?
I'm the black Zachry, yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then on the lean side with LCI and Greg and Glenn and that group on last planner and pull planning and that sort of thing. And I've been a believer a long time that AWP and lean can peacefully coexist and have more congruence than differences, even though those camps have been very different camps over the years. It's good to finally see people reaching across the aisle, so to speak, relative to this. So I think this is a refreshing move and conversation point. There are some other groups out in the industry that are trying to bring this together. Like I know Group ASI, if some of you know Lloyd Rankin, He's been one of the folks out there from the AWP side that's also trying to corral and bring together the lean and AWP camps into kind of unifying the bodies of work and coming up with best practices, not only on this topic of data standards and taxonomy and data exchange, but just also on conjoined research and advancing all of it more together than separate. Anyway, happy to be here, and hopefully I can, help contribute and help you, Jeff, and facilitating the discussion. With that, I'll pass the baton.
Awesome. Dylan, I'm going to ask you to take it from here. Just do a little bit of an introduction and kind of where you sit in this piece.
Yeah, sounds good. My name is Dylan Underhill. I'm the BIM and VDC advisor at Trillium. I've been working with Tanis and Alex and the green Zachry a bunch on AWP and how we're implementing it, how we're utilizing it for heavy industrial. But my focus is how AWP interacts with BIM and how we produce 4D simulations and things of that nature that kind of help that AWP process be more accessible to more people. And then eventually, how do we transition AWP from this heavy industrial side of things to a more commercial side or even residential kind of how do we scale that appropriately to other industries? My background is architectural technologies, so I've seen that side of things. I've worked for general contractors, so I've seen production to construction, and I kind of see where the disconnects are. And I think with BIM VDC and advanced work packaging, we can kind of generate these projects that are valuable and pretty much open to anybody, and the information is central and easy to follow. And that's kind of where I am at.
Awesome. I think that sets a level stage. I'm going to take us back in a second. Josh, I'm going to ask you to go up next and just kind of give your perspective. I am going to take us back to Pete once we get through Erez as well, and kind of do a little bit of definitional work just to make sure we're on the same page. This is a launch point for something later. So I always want to make sure if somebody's listening in later that doesn't understand this, or one of you that doesn't understand it, we can talk a little bit more. Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh Kunkel with Method Group. We're an architecture and interior design firm. And I think the reason why I got in through the back door on this today is that we actually adapted Agile or Scrum into how we do our workflow as architects. And so we run sprints and we're just in the process of transitioning our work system from Trello to ClickUp for many of the reasons that some of the things we're going to talk about today. So we're a digital first firm that focuses on complex projects and adaptive reuse, infill, and now in industrial.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think that leaves my good friend Erez, although, oh, there you are. Everybody's moving their cameras around so I can see where they go. Erez, you're up. Kind of give you a little introduction and your perspective.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. So I'm Erez Dror. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Genda, which I will mention briefly later on. And my background is in construction. Started my way as a carpenter, then became an assistant super, a BIM manager, and eventually a PM. And at the same time, I studied civil engineering. So my master's was in lean construction, a lot about location-based scheduling and how can we use data from the field to understand our constraints better when we do the scheduling and when we do the production itself, which leads to what we do in Genda. Not a sales pitch, but what we do is we monitor site resources, mostly labor and equipment, to understand what is happening on the project, meaning we have a better understanding of what constraints are there when we want to do a task. So we can tell in each location how many workers were there, what's the real production rates, and we can take this data back for scheduling. So when we get to the phase of talking more about last planner and location-based scheduling, I think I can have some interesting insights in that part.
Awesome. I like that. I mean, we've all got our own perspectives, got places to be from. So, and I think it provides a unique piece here, especially, I mean, even my experience. I'm going to take us back to the how might we, really to say we want to say, I want to go back over work breakdown structure and kind of get an understanding from the experts here what work breakdown structure really means at a high level. I know we want to dive into the discussion, but if we don't have a good foundation, we can't do it. Then a little bit about advanced work packaging. And I know we referenced Last Planner here, but I know Last Planner and TACT are kind of, I don't know if they're at war. Maybe one of y'all can talk about that a little bit. On my notes, because I use the notes. Thank you, Nathan. Dylan or Josh, which one of you would like to kind of talk about WBS and give us kind of a definition so we have a level set?
Dylan, you can go ahead.
I'm more in the advanced work package sector. The work
Okay.
breakdown or WBS isn't really something I've had too much exposure to, actually.
Okay, Pete, do you or Pete or Dylan, do you want
Yeah.
to jump in?
I'll be happy to help. Yeah. So WBS, just work breakdown structure, has been around since construction projects began. There's no science to it at all. It's just taking a large chunk of work and breaking it into smaller chunks so it can be apportioned into contracts and scopes of work and be manageable, and you can put activities in a Gantt chart and in a schedule and so forth. So there's not probably a lot of time that needs to be spent on it. A work breakdown structure is actually inherent in every planning system that's ever been invented, including AWP and Last Planner and all of that. It's buried in it. So if you imagine you're building a house, a typical WBS breakdown of that would go into, you have a block, for the foundation and the putting up the framing and roughing in the plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. It's just chunking out the work. So there you go. There's a great example right there of building a building. So it doesn't infer sequencing, coordination, scheduling, or anything like that. It's just the chunking of work that then would go into some other process for saying, well, I must do this before I do that. I want to combine these things into a contract or something like that. So it's really a building block or a foundational piece of logic breakdown of a project that then can feed into a planning system. And I think it deserves no more conversation than that, because there's no sophistication or science or real planning aspect to it at all.
Okay. And it's used quite frequently in estimation and from that perspective to quantify things, correct?
Every estimator breaks their estimates down into a WBS structure, of course. Yep. But again, this is nothing new. This is project management 101. It's been around since the Romans built the aqueducts. I mean, there's nothing advanced to it whatsoever. Very fundamental building block. Yeah.
I happen to agree with you, but we still have a tendency to make it fun. So let's go on to AWP. And I think this is the good one for AWP, but I'll go to Jillian first on this one. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what AWP is, advanced work packaging, and how it maybe could connect or why it might connect?
Yeah, so advanced work packaging is essentially taking a very large project and breaking it down into a CWA or construction work area, and then breaking that area down into a smaller package, which would be CWP, which is a construction work package, and then break it down even further into an installation work package. So it's very similar to the way that you're working with a breakdown, any kind of breakdown structure where you're fully zoomed out and you're slowly zooming in and continuously doing that. One of the processes in AWP that helps facilitate implementation is having a set of work that is unconstrained, and that unconstrained work is essentially released to the field, and then the field can conduct that work inside of that installation work package. And you can have many different ways you do this, but essentially it's just building out the project in a way that's functional for the field. And then as a BIM VDC side of things, we keep all that metadata inside of the model. So all of our model elements have their CWA, their IWP associations,
And then that gives us the ability to later on create 4D simulations or just view the model based on that breakdown. And that metadata is super valuable for us because since we're starting so far out at the CWA or that area definition, every time the model updates, we push it forward in its LOD or level of development. We also can start pushing the metadata in those level of development. So AWP kind of naturally follows the way you would build out a production set of drawings or how you would implement engineering processes. And AWP kind of encompasses everything. It includes the engineering and design, all the way to the construction, procurement, all of that. It's all included in that AWP process. They just slot in at different times, but it functionally, it works really well with the BIM or VDC workflow that most people are accustomed to.
Cool. Josh, I saw you nodding your head. I think you can probably add a little bit of your perspective to that piece as well to kind of round it out, especially given you're in the architecture.
Yeah, so I didn't know it was called this, so it's connecting some dots in my brain. But we were involved with a mega industrial project, 2 million square feet, paper manufacturing and processing plant. And we were integral with the design build team, and this is how we staged the workflow. And so again, everybody was involved, including all the way down to the subcontractor level. And we were managing work without turning dirt on the site in those specific packages. And it created for very because the schedule on it was 16 months from mass earth to occupancy. So very, very complex project with a significant amount of prefabrication.
Okay, excellent.
Hey Jeff.
Yes, sir.
If it's helpful, I can give a little bit of background into the philosophy of AWP, because the mechanics are probably even not as important as the philosophy and what you're trying to achieve with AWP.
You got it.
And this will bridge over to what LCI and Glenn and Greg were trying to achieve with Last Planner. And the core essence behind both the philosophies is grounded in the same thing. And that is to give the field crews maximum opportunity to be as productive as possible. And so what was happening, so all this started in Alberta, advanced work packaging, and it started in the early 2000s. It was a building boom going on up there in the oil sands, and Suncor and Syncrude and all these companies were building these mega projects, and they were just failure after failure, overrun after overrun. They were real disasters. And there was this belief at the time amongst a lot of these large owner groups up there that the craft person was to blame. Boy, if we could just get better craftspeople, boy, those union contractors. And so there was this big debate that came about. And so a group started to say, you know what, it isn't the craftsperson's fault. You know, we management, we're to blame. And so if we could just get all of the stuff to the field when the craftsperson needs it, then we can maximize the opportunity for them to be productive. So let's get all the information, all the materials, all the equipment, all the tools, all the and make sure we get it there so that at least when they're going to start their work, they're not looking for stuff, waiting for stuff. They can maximize their tool times. So they did all these tool time studies, and they were abysmal back then. And then, so this created work-phase planning, which was, let's get the work phase in the field ready to work. Okay, so then that led to a push sort of approach. So what was happening then was, all right, well, then let's engineer everything early. Let's buy everything early. Let's ship everything early. Let's stack all that stuff up at the job site so that, you know, it's there when they need it, kind of thing. And the idea was, let's begin with the end in mind. Okay, that first of all, we're doing construction to operate a facility, to run a plant that's going to produce a product. Okay, that's the ultimate customer. And that facility has to be turned over and started up in a certain sequence. Well, to do that right, we have to build it in the right sequence so it can then be turned over and started up in the right sequence. Okay. Then CII came in and said, all right, guys, this is great. You're building things efficiently, fine, but you're still not being successful because in order to build something efficiently, you've got to procure it efficiently. You've got to then engineer it efficiently and in the right order. Therefore, you've got to plan it in the right order. So CII brought in the mindset with, and worked with COA on this. Let's back this whole thing up into the front end planning stage and start there. It's not enough to start in the field. It's too late. Okay, because it's already been engineered. You've already bought the materials. You got to start much, much earlier. And that's why they came up with the term advanced work packaging, which was really just, a fancy term. Let's start earlier and let's do it in a much more robust way. So the whole idea here is you start even before the model is ready, as Dylan was talking about the 3D model. You can do this. You really should start packaging well before the model's done, in FEL2 or programming 2 or whatever. And you basically start to plan it in the right way. So therefore it can be contracted in the right way, then engineered in the right way, then procured and fabricated, and then built in the right way, and then turned over in the right way. So you say, how am I going to run the plant? And then you back all the way up in logic to now your early planning stages. And then you chunk and package the work accordingly. So the most discrete, smallest chunk of work is in the field that you show here in IWP, an installation work package.
Mm-hmm.
You also can have a module installation work package or a field installation work. So you'll see MIWP or FIWP. It's just an indicator of where it's done. And then as you back up into engineering, the chunks get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but they all correlate. They all tie. And so you'll have, like in the very beginning, I'm going to do an engineering work package. Well, that engineering work package is going to then tie to a construction work package.
Mm-hmm.
And then that construction work package, as Dylan was saying, will get subdivided and sub-chunked out into smaller and smaller pieces of work that ultimately get managed as a discrete chunk. But the whole idea is you got to do all of that stuff in the right order. So again, you engineer it in the right order, and you procure it in the right order, and you fabricate it in the right order. So that's the magic of AWP, is to get all that right.
Okay.
And that's why there's software tools out there to help you kind of organize your work and build your work packages and all of that. And then if we get that right as an industry, we'll actually tie all the commercial side of things to this, because that's a mismatch today. If you do AWP, but then you're paying people by the hour, or if you do AWP and if you're not doing a commercial model that ties to the completion of work packages, we have a huge missed opportunity. In fact, we often fail with AWP implementations because the contracts promote behavior that's counter to actually achieving AWP objectives. So that's the next opportunity, is to tie, the contract model to how we want people to behave and accomplish work in an AWP environment. So, but it still is very dependent upon a push approach.
Yes.
I'm going to push things to this job site. I'm going to build up inventory so that I can basically have the stuff there when I need it. The opposite philosophy, and this is why the lean people and the AWP people didn't get along for a long time. The opposite philosophy is the pull approach, just in time. That's lean. That's lean manufacturing. That's pull planning. That's last planner. They're all about, hey, pull all the stuff to the field exactly when I need it or whatever. So the push versus pull is the fundamental divide between the AWP and the lean camps over the years that I think we're all getting over now. I think that we're getting past that, because I think now there's a belief that, from the AWP side, we don't want to push everything to the field. It's extremely expensive. If it doesn't give me room to change anything because I've already engineered it and bought it. It creates a very non-agile work environment. So I think the AWP people are getting smarter and saying, all right, we do need to use some more lean approaches. We do need to use more agile approaches. We can still do work packaging, but we really need to have elements of both of these philosophies now kind of coming together. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. But I think the philosophy of AWP in particular is important to understand. So people understand, well, why are we doing all this? Dylan went through this explanation of all that. Well, there's a why behind it, and that's essentially the why.
Yeah. Thank you, Pete. I went out of the order a little bit there, and I like adding the why, although I did see a lot of heads nodding. Before I bring the last planner side of things in, and maybe a little bit more to Erez here, Josh or Dylan, did that spark you guys to want to say anything before I move it? And then I'm going to ask a really dumb question, but let's go.
No, that was a really good explanation of where it came from and what it's looking to achieve. I definitely agree that lean and AWP have kind of been at odds, but yeah, there's definitely room for both of them to grow and mature each other into better systems. So I thought that was interesting. And the contractual side of things, that's not something I generally get into, but that is, I think that's a great point to bring up. That's something that needs to maybe change or work towards. I think that's an interesting topic.
Yeah. Josh, any thoughts there before I bump it to Erez?
Yeah, it was the contract and understanding like the goals and outcomes that you have to achieve as a team and making sure that there's alignment. Because if you have to have your team rowing the other direction because of a contractual obligation or this is how we've always done it, then it's not going to be effective, or you're going to be pulling them along. So
yeah, we could have a whole nother breakout session on how contractually we are obligated to do things opposite of what we are trying to achieve. So I'll leave that to Pete and the team. Laurie, I saw you.
Yeah, I have a quick dumb question before your dumb question.
Okay.
I always associate AWP with like EPC projects or plant projects. Is that still true? Or is it shifting at all? Like, are there more applications outside of that, or is that a misconception, just a baseline misconception?
For us, the Trillium and Zachry, that's pretty accurate that it's large plant-based or heavy industrial or natural resource, but there is a drive for us to shift it to commercial, residential, hospitals, continuing care, kind of bring what we're learning over there and bring it down. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, I'll plug Erez there, Laurie. Erez is actually, that's one of the things why he showed up here. We had a talk externally and brought him here for that, because we think that there is a collision coming. And actually, if we can, as an organization, meaning the CPC, reduce the friction and define a few things, we can prevent a clash of the heads repeating itself, which aren't we great at that in construction, is repeating the same problems over and over in different sectors. So yes, it's primarily EPC and industrial, but that it does, I don't think it precludes itself. And I think there's a big interest for it to move to other places.
Okay, and let me
Laurie.
toss out one more question that doesn't need an answer, but I think is like the reason why I always assumed that it was EPC was essentially because there was no architect, which makes the work breakdown and like the systems planning easier. So I'd be very curious, like, as we move forward this discussion, like if we think this concept can translate, what has to change about the concept, or what has to change about around the industry, or like what is the recognition there? So like I'm very interested in hearing people's opinions as this conversation continues.
That's the reason we brought Josh. We're going to put Josh on a poster that says AWP can have an architect. I am your architect.
Well, Josh, nice to meet you. Glad you can solve all our problems.
Well, I was going to say, we're seeing a lot of these premise and tenants come in because of the supply chain issues that we're having. And so like for us on, historic preservation projects, like we're in between our submitting our part 2, a DD package and our CD package, and they're already starting to order flooring and windows and those kinds of things because of the lead times. And so they have it on site so that they can install it. And so we're seeing a lot of that kind of, because we typically only do CM projects. And so we're working in tandem already. And so that's just something that we're seeing moving up per this method in practice.
So if I'm understanding, essentially,
Yeah.
what you're saying, some of the behavior of the industry change that might open us up to planning techniques such as advanced work packaging is pressure on the supply chain.
Yes, absolutely. Because like what we're seeing is something that was normally on the shelf is now 8 months. And so like we're getting substantial substitution requests like, hey, even though this thing is more expensive, I can get it today. instead of,
Sure.
and I'll order it and warehouse it instead. And so that's one of those things, that time is actually becoming the more valuable resource than dollars.
Which is funny.
on-
All it takes is
yeah.
a pandemic to tell us that maybe inventory isn't always a bad thing.
Well, and it's an interesting conundrum there, and it's what's forcing lean and AWP, I think, to get past its issues, and drive efficiencies. Like there's a push and pull here. Erez, did we miss anything? I know you're here probably for farther down the line, but I wanted to make sure, I've just been saying your name a bunch and hadn't let you talk yet.
I have nothing special to add
Okay.
in this part.
Excellent. So I do have one dumb question for the group here. I see AWP, I see WBS, right? Why do I need the two of them to correlate with one another in any way, shape, or form? As Pete said, WBS has been around forever. Why are we even sitting down so that we can do something with WBS, AWP, and lean and tech planning?
Hey, I'll be good. This is Todd. So on that, it's the WBS feeds into both the advanced work packaging and the last planner system, which focuses on work structuring as the which is similar to the way the installation work packages go. So that's I guess you'll see that connection when we get into the next topic, I guess, but.
Okay.
Well, that's my opinion.
Well, Jeff, all of these philosophies are really just glorified common sense. Really, if you went back in the day, in old days of construction, really good superintendents and construction managers packaged their work, planned their work, sequenced their work, and did a pretty darn good job of it. The issue today is projects are huge, they're complex, they're fragmented, they're global, and they involve companies from all over the place and different languages and cultures and all of these in the supply chain issues you're just referring to and so on. And so the complexity is huge. So we've got to have a way of formalizing common sense and creating some structure around how we're going to pull a project together. And the question earlier from Laurie around the architects, look, a project has to be engineered, procured, and constructed, regardless of what it is, whether it's a school or a hospital or a refinery or whatever. It really doesn't matter if an architect's involved. They're just essentially doing some design work. The key is to make sure that work is done in service to how I'm going to build it and start it up. That's the magic of getting this right. Now, architects and engineers typically like to design things in the sequence that they think is right. It's most convenient for them, or it's the most efficient for them. That may not be the most efficient for how it's going to get built. So the real thing here is to make sure all of that gets sequenced correctly, and that they understand I need to design this in a different way, because it doesn't really matter if it's convenient for me or not. I'm doing this work for the builder and then ultimately the operator of the plant. And really, you're aligning all of those arrows in that same common direction. And that's really what you're trying to achieve here. And we wrap that in a package called AWP, which is the formality of trying to achieve that in every single step of the process.
Okay. And I just brought up kind of a lean tech planning piece, because I think that is the one thing we didn't cover in that piece. Am I right? That this is more, and by the way, this graph makes no sense to me. So whoever wants to take this, I kinda get it, but out of my league. And is that the next place, Pete, we would go in this conversation to get there? Where should we go next?
What tech planning is really trying to do at a very detailed sub-trade level at the site is you're trying to optimize a few things all at the same time. Workflow through the building. It's usually done in a building environment. Imagine rooms in a hospital or something that you're building or whatever. So you're trying to optimize workflow. You're trying to optimize crews and crew allocation. Okay. And so you're trying to get things so, like, all right, the plumber can go from room number 1 to room number 2 to room number 3 in a really, really efficient way. And then the next subtrade can come in right after them in the most efficient way. And then you can sort of build the building in the most efficient geographical way. So you're really trying to optimize these kind of X, Y, and Z axis of these different kind of pieces of workflow, both from a crew level and in a geographical physical level on the project. And that's really what TACT is trying to do. TACT is actually a word that really means drumbeat or rhythm. And so you're trying to create a rhythm to the job where it's like, your job, if you go into the job site, it's, it's got this common drumbeat. There's no disruption. There's a flow. It's smooth. It's really an evolution of lean and lean project delivery and really what Lance Planner is trying to do. So there's not a real good correlation today between AWP and TACT. It's really more of a correlation between lean and TACT, because this is all from manufacturing, essentially. This is what a manufacturing plant does. They measure takt time.
Okay.
I think one interesting contrast, maybe thinking about AWP and TACT, this TACT, as I understand it, is breaking it down. It's drumbeat, but it's also breaking down the work so that there's consistent chunks or durations of work between a parade of trade, right? Electrician's going to be in this area for a day, and then whomever is next, maybe drywall's in this area for a day, then the electrician's going to come in.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So that's kind of an interesting thing between the idea of work structuring, of like maybe that's not the intent of the AWP right now. It's not thinking in that way, but it's an interesting way of thinking about how to structure your work, right?
And I will mention that that resembles the way that we've broken down our work structure within our firm, is exactly this. And we do 1 week sprints. And so there's this constant rhythm to it. And so, but you have to be able, it's what can you accomplish within this span that then moves you to the next thing and to the next thing. And so you have to look at it from a high level and understand when the right things are supposed to happen in order to meet the next milestone and the next milestone.
So I agree. The interesting thing about that diagram is like, I haven't seen a line of balance diagram for takt time planning before. I usually see you see the takt trains. I'm curious if anybody else has seen line of balance used for takt time before.
I'll bring it back up so you guys can see it. I'm sorry. Right there. And this was a Nathan thing, so we were just doing some visual. Yeah, we were doing some visuals. So if this doesn't make sense to anybody and isn't there, it was more to push discussion in case questions happened. So I don't want to get us focused too much on the lines. Erez, there was one thing.
I think line of balance is super cool, but different.
Yeah, Erez, I did want I have notes in here for you to talk a little bit about this and Andrea's construction and some of the findings and why some of this connecting together might be so important for what we experience in the field.
If you can go back one slide, I'll let a note about the location-based schedule, and then we can dive into some examples.
This one?
The one with the weird lines that nobody
understands. Weird lines, we're there.
Yes, perfect. So I think at least the way I look at it, location-based scheduling is like a more detailed way to plan our work compared to the other methods we looked at before. We're really diving into a more detailed approach, and we put the areas or the locations in the center. We look at the specific location and the work packages that will go through that location, and that way trying to create that flow, line of balance, it all comes in play. One thing that's important to mention about creating these location-based schedules is what you need to make it happen. You need to understand your work packages. You need to understand which locations you want to structure the work. Is it a level? Is it a specific unit? Is it an entire building? What is the granularity you want to dive into? And then to understand what resources you have available. So Pete mentioned crews, but crews is not the only thing. To make the work flow or to make sure you have that takt, that beat, you need to understand you have the crews. You need to remove all constraints or control all constraints, from crews to equipment, anything you need to do to accomplish that work. And at least from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges we have in implementing those techniques efficiently is that we don't really know what is really happening in the field. And we will get to the example that we have with some of our clients on how difficult it is to say what is the line of balance, what is the really the real time it takes us to accomplish that mini work package in that specific location, and therefore maintain that flow that is so hard to accomplish. Not sure if I guess we can jump to the next slide, and I can share some examples of how we generate data. And I hope it will open a discussion about the constraints we need to make sure that are understood before we can dive into those techniques.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give a really quick example here. One of the things that, or any comments before I jump into this example, because it's kind of a different thing.
If I may chime in here, location-based planning on that previous slide, those lines, as Erez mentioned, represent the trades and work that's happening, and it's not different than a site congestion analysis, because as those lines converge, you're going to see some sort of congestion in a certain area, or someone blocking another trade to work in that area, so you need to create some backlogs and such. So that's the basis of location-based planning, and it kind of lends itself to be utilized in repetitive work, in the seminal work on location-based planning. Russell Kenny and Ollie Sepanen mentioned that this is highly applicable to repetitive work like highway construction or hotels, where you do the same thing over and over again, but might not be applicable for hospitals or industrial projects. But since then, it has evolved, and Ollie Sepanen has been involved in the evolution of tax planning as well. He's one of the forefathers of the technique out of Finland. So as it evolved, it kind of became more applicable towards other types of works as well, not necessarily repetitive. And that's where it is now more aligned with AWP and lean construction, because now, as Dylan mentioned earlier, AWP looks at a project at the very beginning from an area perspective, right? You create those CWAs to break it down. It's no different than what's on screen. You're still looking at different areas, and then you're trying to create your packages around certain contracting strategies and trends and trades. So personally, I really don't understand why these techniques kind of go head to head at some level, because at a philosophical level, as Pete mentioned, they are essentially the same thing. Pete started describing WBS as breaking down a project into smaller chunks. Dylan started with almost the exact same phrases when he's explaining AWP. So it's essentially, doing the same thing, trying to establish and do the same thing from different perspectives. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of getting the best parts of each concept, as Pete also mentioned, these glorified common sense concepts, and coming up with something that works for you, because there's no one size fits all with these tools.
Cool. And Erez, I think you're going to take it to where exactly what Rez is talking about. It's really about congestion and trade stacking, but that WBS and AWP don't take into reality that there is far more than AWP and WBS involved in this. There is the human component, the movement component, et cetera, which I think adds the complexity, which has created some of the friction that we're talking about. So maybe you can take it from there.
If we look at these lines, the main thing to make this work to make this flow is to make sure that I lost the word.
The rate.
The rate is like it shows in the graph. So if there are any constraints that are not taken into consideration, the blue line, as an example, that is in the middle, can be different and end in a different time and mess the whole thing. So one of the things we figured out that need to be done is to understand those constraints. It can be times labor spends in those locations, and it can be equipment that needs to be used. Jeff, if you can jump to the next slide, I'll go real briefly about an example we had in one of our projects. The general contractor had 3 cars moving the workers across the building, across those locations. And he was sure he's going to maintain that flow. And what happened eventually is that they realized that they are not moving people fast enough, so that flow can be maintained. If we think that the crew will be there Sunday, starting something they do, and it can be a vertical project, it can be a railway, it doesn't really matter. If there is a time constraint or equipment constraint that blocks our crews from being there, we won't be able to accomplish the work, and therefore we'll be late on our schedule. So that's just an example of an analysis we did that showed that once they added a new car to the elevator, to the main lift, they were able to reduce the time that it takes to go up. They saved 1,000 hours a month, which is a lot of time of work, and they were able to maintain that flow in a better way. So this is just an example of things that we don't take into consideration in other methods. And as I mentioned before, I see this diving into more details in the planning or scheduling phase. And I think an interesting discussion for this group is, does it even make sense for the architect to take those constraints into consideration when you do the design? Do we even know what are those constraints going to be?
It's a unique question, I think, and I think Genda's doing a piece on it, and we see others doing a piece on it. There was one I had on a show recently. Versatile's doing it. When you're taking AWP, but then you're also taking what you're doing from a crane lift perspective and picks and packs, and making sure they follow a TAC plan for consistently providing information or providing materials to trades to stay in flow. And for me, this is the field informing design, informing construction, informing design, starting to try to create this circle. So we've kind of laid all that out. Now, what are some of the things and reasons or issues that we're experiencing that are keeping us from doing this? Why would, again, I'm going to ask the dumb question, why would the Construction Progress Coalition want to try to systematically connect these together? I love a good silence.
It's the sound of thinking.
So I don't know, I have a sick baby at home, so I'm sort of off camera and muted most of the time. But I mean, when you look at the ability of the sort of old school WBS, or as we sort of stated earlier, that I mean, WBS is already built into advanced work packaging. But if we can bring these together, theoretically, we could have better transparency and productivity. Though the difficulty that I've always found is repeatable projects, as we talked about, like multifamily residential, or something that's modular, that's already pre-designed, fit really well in that AWP. But like where I'm always struggling is the more complex projects, how do we bridge that gap? Because it seems like for me, if, okay, you're going to do building 1, floor 1, unit 1, this, or I'm installing this pod, it makes sense. But how do we, I don't know, that's where I'm struggling. It's like, I think we should bridge the gap, but how do we bridge it for these more complex projects, not just EPC type projects or modular projects?
I think one of the ways we could approach that or answer that, Jeff, is there's just some really good philosophy that resides in both, that both sides can learn from each other. And I'm talking the lean and the AWP people. Let's take, for instance, buffers, the idea of buffers. The idea of schedule buffers, inventory buffers is really more of a lean philosophy. It's basically the acceptance, the realization acceptance that we're going to have variation in the field, and we need to basically have a production system that can be adaptable and respond to variation when it happens, and it doesn't create complete chaos if we have a weather event or something that just didn't show up on time or something like that. And so you actually intentionally under plan some resources to allow for buffers in there. So your assignment sizing might be at 80, 85% versus planning at 100%. Well, that blows the minds of most normal I'll say industrial construction, EPC, AWP people. They're like, what are you talking about? My crew has the capacity to put in this much pipe. My estimator said so. And I always plan for them to do that every day. And if they don't, shame on them. And so they tend to plan at 100%, which creates a production system that can't absorb variation. So there's a very good example where the AWP people could really learn from the philosophy that really works when it comes to putting intentional buffers into a plan, creating assignment sizes that allow for variation to creep into the project environment, which happens all the time. And that would really improve, I think, the predictability of projects that use AWP, because many of them that use AWP still aren't successful projects. Now, I think the CI research has shown that AWP generally does tend to create better outcomes. Yes, I think so. But I think there's a huge room for improvement still with projects using AWP to be even better, because they still don't really understand kind of the physics of flow. They don't really have that whole flow mentality, the whole tact mentality in the AWP side. So there's an example, maybe, Jeff, answering your question. Why should anyone care about kind of bringing these two camps together? I think that's a good example right there of where they can help each other out.
Yeah, I want to add that even though we're doing AWP on some highly complex projects, what we're also doing on the side from a Trillium perspective is building out dashboards that measure constraints in the field that maybe weren't accounted for, or they identify, there was 10 bad weather days in a row, and that had a significant impact on the project. And what we're starting to see or do is kind of talk back and forth with the AWP and the site and understand if we are losing momentum in certain areas, is there other areas that we can explore to catch up? Is there other work that we can build better? If this package didn't go as quickly as we planned, what do we need to bring into consideration for the next set of packages? And then that's also a driving factor for a lot of us to start looking more at digital twinning and how we can kind of conglomerate all of these processes with technology and these generate more feedback loops between everybody and all of the systems individually, so that we're not just saying AWP is the answer. If you guys can't install this fast, well, that's on your guys. It's more of, this is the reality of the situation. What can we do to make that reality better?
Do we feel that we can do AWP projects without heavy design, right? I mean, does it have to be a BIM, or it doesn't have to be BIM, but a design first project? Like, are there pre-constraints to being able to deliver a project consistently that allow AWP to work better than, say, historical, like a work breakdown structure? Or no, that's really, that doesn't make a difference. There's no difference. I'm just curious what
Benny,
people think.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Can you?
So my question is, do we need to have, so when I think of modular, right? So a lot of times I'm thinking of prefabrication or modular, and we already have models that are broken down into nice bite-sized fabricatable or buildable features that can happen offsite that are then installable. So, right, it lends itself very easily to an advanced work package because, right, you're already thinking about how you're breaking up the model very early on. So that's how our MEP contractors are doing it, right? They break up the model in ways that then are buildable and installable, right? But like offsite. And so is that a prereq that this is a design heavy project, or can we do these projects? I mean, is this something that we're saying that you have to have BIM, you have to be design heavy to be able to take advantage of advanced work packaging, is what I'm saying? Or do we feel like, no, that's not a necessity?
Benny, I would answer no, because really the best companies implementing AWP you don't even have to have a model, a 3D model. In fact, AWP begins before the 3D model even starts. If you're doing AWP correctly, you're doing it in so early in the planning phase that the model's not even begun. You're using plot plans and GIS information and 2D sort of overlays of your facility to start to chunk the work, think about your major construction work areas, and you're starting to plan the work, even early purchasing. And in fact, you're using that 2D stuff to help determine should you even modularize or do offsite fab in the first place. Now, only later does the model come into effect and then mature all of that work, and make it better and make it manageable. But you don't have to have a 3D model to do AWP. It certainly makes it a hell of a lot easier to organize your information. Of course, got all that, but it's not a prerequisite.
Josh, I know you unmuted. Do you have a follow-up there?
I was just going to agree with that. On one of the projects that we were involved with, this was pre-Revit, but all of these subs and the other major trades were in Revit to then be able to do quantities. And it's kind of, you're setting your parameters, but then you're confirming those parameters in great detail later once you cross over into actual design and documentation.
So I heard the estimation come into this for the first time. And Pete, I think you made a pretty interesting statement there. Maybe it wasn't interesting to others, but maybe it's just because where I live in the world, it is to me. But you said, they've estimated it. They estimated it. It'll take this long to put that in. That's how we put together estimates is around, it's this much framing and it's this much time, or it's this much this and it's this much time. How is that? And that creates, the cost model. So how does the cost model and the advanced work packaging model come together, and why do they need to come together? Is that feeding design, Josh, so that it helps you? Dylan, is it, help you? Where in this process, especially since you're talking about pre-model, where are we, and how does that fit together?
Well, the work package, Jeff, down to the most minuscule chunk of work in AWP is the IWP, the installation work package. And the rule of thumb is that's roughly a week's worth of work for a particular crew. They're usually crew specific, piping or electrical or whatever. Those are quantified chunks of work, meaning they have hours, they have dollars, they have quantities. That whole package is a fully quantified chunk of work. And so therefore it should tie back to your cost breakdown structure and to your estimate. Now, when you're creating an estimate early, you don't know that level of specificity, right? You're usually estimating at a much higher level, maybe at a much larger construction work area or construction work package level, because you've not detailed the project out yet, right? It's too early in the life cycle. But as you go through that planning process and you mature the scope definition of the project, it all should tie back to those estimating line items you created back then in your higher level WBS structure that you used to create the estimate. So your cost breakdown structure, your work breakdown structure, they all have to tie together. In fact, they have to tie into your schedule as well, for that matter.
That's where I was going. And I think that's where, maybe further down the road, we'll start to break out what are those components that allow us to translate through that process. Because if I'm understanding, those are different people, right? The AWP folks and the estimators aren't, they're not the same group. Am I right?
Well, yeah, generally you're right. Estimators are usually different than the people that do the actual planning work, but that's just because of division of duties, because it's just too much for any one person to handle typically. But if you had a small enough job, your estimator could be your creator of work packages if they had the bandwidth to do it. But typically projects have discrete work, planners that create their work packages. In fact, they often call them work-face planners that they'll staff on a project to actually create those work packages.
All right. Trying to move us through what's needed to move forward. That's probably something for a little bit later. One thing we had was, how does throughput vary by stakeholder? I think it does vary by stakeholder. This was in here. We only have a few more minutes. I just want to make sure, Pete, to my panel, thank you. To any of you, was there anything we didn't cover? There's anything you want to plant for a further seed? Remember, we are going to come back to this thing, and I'm asking a lot of dumb questions for a reason. I think there's a huge need for this from a data perspective, because I can see from the earliest planning all the way through to what teams like Erez and products like that are trying to do to feed the life cycle, that there's a lot of commonality required, a lot of translation that probably gets lost right now. Anything anybody who's not distracted by a baby in the view right now can do or wants to say?
Just maybe Pete had a great point that projects are more complex than ever. They cost more and they're harder to build. So having any sort of process that looks from the outside in and looks at the end goal in mind is always going to be more successful than people who are just trying to mash it together in a time frame.
As it is about understanding throughput, understanding the new world that we're in. Hopefully I did a good job of doing that and recapping it for everybody.
And one thing I've learned is just in all those discussions is that it's okay sometimes if the measurement is quote fake, as long as it's logical and it makes sense for it is what it is. And a lot of that earned value reporting and things like that, it's the more you get into the finance world, you realize a lot of that is just kind of fuzzy math too. And so as long as the fuzzy math, it makes logical sense and we understand why, I think we can really move forward on some of those sticking points where we've gotten stuck before of, yeah, how do you translate the way steel breaks it down versus the way mechanical versus the way a drywall framer would?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we did cover there, and thanks to Laurie for kind of bringing this up, is AWP has really been always looked at as industrial and EPC. And it's thanks to people like Erez and others that were there, is starting to move its way into other areas. But if we can tackle the friction that exists currently, we can help that not experience it again. And who wouldn't love to not repeat the same problem in different verticals of our own industry? That would be kind of nice, wouldn't it? So there's that opportunity, as well as AWP, tech planning, and those things make it into other commercial types of construction, or, housing, multifamily, those other verticals where it can.